Justine Ginsberg, and I'm your host for Health Matters. Researchers have studied how we live in communities. Sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, and public health specialists have examined the various patterns of human behaviour and our community structure and how this affects our ability to live healthy lives. The CDC and National Health Institute have examined the importance of shared community space in relation to population fitness, mental health wellness, and crime reduction. It's been proven time and again that when communities share well-designed spaces for recreation and social programming, that societal issues like an ageing population, isolation, and connectivity are addressed. Some groups, like youth and veterans, self-segregate in communities due to the perception that they may have antisocial interactions. This could yet not be further from the truth. Shared care models for the elderly and youth have been in existence in the UK, Australia and Sweden for many years, and the results of combining social spaces for aged population with daycare children and school children are incredibly impressive. Reduced need for antidepressant medications, increased appetite and increased social interactions are just a few of the benefits for the elderly, whilst reduced costs, increased socialisation and lower anxiety are some of the benefits for the youth. Here in the US, there is a growing movement towards re-engineering community spaces to be more inclusive. One such space is actually here in the Farmington Valley in Granby. Here to discuss with us today are Elliot Altamere and Alicia Newton. Welcome to Health Matters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so Justine's going to try to stick to a time schedule today. I'm not renowned for it. So let's begin by talking a little about the need for community space and why it's so important.
Well, Elliot speaks very eloquently to this, but from my perspective, we're all so connected via social media right now, but no one's having that personal connection. And we're starving for it, really.
Yeah. The research right now shows that in America we have more square foot per person in our living spaces than we've ever had before, and fewer friends. When Americans are asked how many close friends do you have, the most common answer a few decades ago was 4, and today the most common answer is 0. More Americans say they have 0 close friends than any other number.
You know, it's really scary and alarming, and Alicia and I work together in a school project teaching in the schools, and we're seeing this time and time again in the classrooms, this social isolation that's happening with children, even when they're in a community like a school space outside of school. They disappear into their living rooms or into their bedrooms, and they're on computer games.
Yeah.
So why is this so important for a centre like what we're going to talk about to be in a space like Granby? When there's all sorts of other resources available, why is something that is so integrated important?
Well, I know from my perspective, working with young people, a lot of them aren't connected. They don't live anywhere near grandparents. They don't have extended family members like we used to have. They're not having that interaction. And even just having families participate in programming together and having that time and that space where that's allowed. Right now we're going for, kids are overscheduled and they're going from school to soccer practice to, a youth group and home to do homework and maybe some computer games. And nowhere in there is there a space that allows them to be interacting with all different groups together. And we're siloed and we're all doing things in isolation.
Yeah, and churches, at least in New England, used to fill a big part of this. The churches in all the towns around here used to have numbers way higher than they do right now. And so for a lot of the people, the families, the children, they knew from the time they were born that they were part of a larger collective, that they had a community, they had people, they gave to those people who in turn gave to them. Communities took care of each other around these hubs of faith. And that's not happening right now. But the hunger is still there, as Alicia said. People are starving for it. When we talk to people about the community center, and we mention the word isolation, because we come back to over and over again for any population, special needs, seniors, teens, veterans, everyone's coming back to this concept of we're isolated and we're lonely and it's hurting us. People's eyes light up when we talk about that, and they reach their hand across the table and they, that's me. Here's how I felt that. Here's how I see my parents suffering with that. Here's what my own child is telling me. Granby did a youth survey of teenagers last year, and 70% of teenagers felt that they were undervalued by their community, that they're not actually seen. So those are words that come out of all of us, right? Veterans are saying the same thing. Our seniors are saying the same thing. We're all hungry not only for a place to be seen, but a place to matter. What's the meaningful work that we need to do for our community, within our community? We're hungry to matter. And in a community center, all of these needs we have can be met. Not only the need for socialization, but what's a project you're passionate about that you can bring? You know, are you a veteran who can teach how to do woodworking to the middle schoolers, because the middle schoolers are as hungry for that experience as the adults are to help provide it.
And again, we see that in the school program that we teach, where they're 1 hour a month per year level, and we have mentors from the community coming in and working with us, and there is this starvation for adult mentorship. But then at the end of the hour, they have to go back to their school day, and there's nothing that happens outside of the classroom after school that allows for that space to occur. So we're talking about this theoretical space. There actually is a space we're talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about the Kearns Centre? So it's the Kearns Community Centre that we're discussing.
Yeah, so it's called Kearns Community Center because the building is the Kearns Primary School, which was a school that's existed in Granby since the 1960s.
I believe so, yeah.
And it closed down 3 years ago.
Okay.
The building's 40,000 square feet.
Wow, that is a big building.
It's tremendously large. It's all one single floor, except for the gymnasium, which already has wheelchair accessibility built in with an elevator. So part of what we're clear of from the beginning is that this has to be a space that's accessible to anyone, and that accessibility isn't an afterthought. So the space is accessible. Wheelchairs can get there, people with walking disabilities. It's in really good condition. It hasn't been used in 3 years, but the town's been keeping it up. So it's well lit. There's need-a-ceiling windows in every single room, lining the walls.
I think that something I want to pick up on is really important to discuss is that this has been lying dormant for 3 years.
It has
So
been.
this space is this magnificent big school, which has obviously been well architecturally designed for the use of multiple people coming and going.
Right.
And it hasn't been being used for 3 years. So what led you to decide that this is an ideal targeted location to start to develop?
In conversations between Elliot and I was looking for a space for the nonprofit that I run, and every building that we were looking at just didn't feel right. Currently we travel around to community centers and other communal spaces, and that feels good because we're around other people, and we wanted to continue that, but we needed a place to also house all of our things so that I'm not carting it around. And in our conversations, I was talking about how I want to be in a space with other groups that are doing like-minded things, that we can collaborate and we can have this intergenerational, beautiful space to benefit the community. Meanwhile, Elliot was working on some things of his own, and so it just came up. I threw out there, you know what, it would be great if we could have a space like that school that's been empty. And it just grew from there. I was saying in the beginning, it's not possible, that's a big undertaking, I don't know, whereas Elliot was, we could do it, let's just ask. So
I think a really important point as well to bring to light is often when we have a need, we build a space. So we create new construction.
Right.
And we have magnificent well-designed buildings that are dormant inside of our communities that are not being utilised. And you think of the amount of waste, not only of the vision of the architects who previously built it and the money that was invested, but the amount of, if you're going to be environmentally conscious, you're now using all of these new building materials to build a brand new location where something already is there that can just be repurposed.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the things that I find from a public health perspective really exciting about the idea of this project, is that you are taking something that exists and finding another use for it.
Yep.
So Kearns is a family name in Granby, isn't it?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little about the Kearns family?
I was very fortunate. In the beginning, we were talking about whether or not we wanted to keep the name. We needed to know more about Frank Kearns before deciding that. It has a very special place to the people of Granby, but if it's going to be a regional space, will that hold up to everybody? So I met with the Kearns family, and they had this beautiful time capsule box of all of the things that Frank Kearns had been a part of, and he's very much in line with educating and empowering young people. He was a judge in Granby. He was a farmer, very progressive in his views in farming and agriculture. So it was just the perfect fit.
Yeah.
Which I suppose leads to the next exciting question. So this proposed centre is going to serve several different special interest groups. Can you tell us about who's interested in being a part of this and what this might look like?
Everybody?
Everyone. Yes.
So I know Resilience Grows Here, which the viewers at home know as the Veterans Mental Health Initiative from the Farmington Valley Health District, is definitely going to want to champion the veteran component of the Kearns Community Centre. After many years of doing research with veterans and really learning to listen to their voices rather than create things that we want to create, it's what do veterans need. Integrated space is one of the most important things. They need to feel like they're a part of the community to which they come home, not isolated and put to one side as being put in the too hard, not so sure what to do with this group of people box, but bringing them in and using their skill sets. So that's a veteran component. Tell us about the rest.
So we get to have a teen space. Right now, at least, Granby doesn't have a dedicated teen center.
They share that, don't they?
Yeah, they share that with the senior center.
Okay.
And so I see a lot of programming happening in the evenings from like 7 to 9 on Thursday nights and Friday nights. The space itself isn't quite big enough. There's so many kids who are, again, hungry for community, for social interaction. And it's only their space for a few hours. So what we get to do with part of the building is take a bunch of classrooms, knock some of them, the walls down into one larger central space, while also maintaining a separate room for media, a separate room for studying. So part of the building gets to be a teen space, and the teens aren't locked into the teen space in any way, shape, or form, right? Because the art space also gets to be a teen space. The wood shop also gets to be a teen space. The teaching kitchen, the community cafe, the indoor park, all of these spaces we have get to call the people who are hungry for those spaces and invite them in.
And I suppose if you look at the teen space where it is at the moment in the community centre shared with the seniors, they have to keep packing their equipment up. They can't leave that teen space dedicated to teens because they have to share that space, that same single space with the senior population. And obviously, any of us who've lived and worked with teenagers and lived and worked with seniors, perhaps the same equipment isn't always used for both.
Right.
So having that space that can be under the same roof, but specialised for each individual group is so important.
Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned things that I want to talk more about. Teaching kitchens and a community cafe. Alicia, I have a feeling this might be in your corner.
Yes, so Nourish My Soul would be operating that area. Currently, we teach junior chef classes to middle schoolers, and sometimes we do classes for younger kids. But there's been a desire for all age groups to have access to these classes. And currently, in our model with driving around and setting up in various places, it's not possible. So having a dedicated teaching kitchen can accommodate up to 24 people at a time. And so it's large enough, it's purposefully designed so that we can have classrooms come in during the day, schools can come and learn. Or you can have families come in, we can do food prep, we can do education, either culinary, nutrition, or something combined both. We're also going to have a food pantry there, so that will also provide access. We can have people come pick up their food and then prepare it right there and bring it home as prepared meals so that during the week when they're busy and they're working, they can just heat and serve.
Wow.
And incubator kitchens will also be there. So if someone has an idea for a startup business or they're a farmer and they have excess tomatoes and they want to make some salsa or something, they can do that in an improved kitchen and get the business skills also to try and launch that.
Well, so I think about the programming that you run with Nourish My Soul, and I think about the programs you run with From the Ground Up, and the way you introduce the youth in our communities in the Farmington Valley to not just food justice, but to community service. I think many of the viewers at home may have been the lucky recipients or know of people who have been the lucky recipients of meals from your group, people who've been struggling, people who've had a tragedy, You always do, every class you teach, you do a meal for somebody in the community who gives service. You like to provide a meal and a sit-down meal for them to be able to experience the charity of your group, as well as looking at good nutrition and, you know, helping kids to understand how to eat well, helping parents to understand how to feed their children well. So there's so much more to a teaching kitchen than just a cooking class.
Yes. And when kids feel empowered to create their own meals, it's amazing how much healthier they eat.
Yeah.
You know, they're going home and they're begging their parents to buy asparagus and Brussels sprouts, whereas before they wouldn't even touch anything but ketchup, you know, as a vegetable. So.
And I have witnessed 7 and 8-year-olds out of Alicia's group begging for Brussels sprouts. Just saying. Community cafe.
Oh, yes. So that's a big one. That came from, you mentioned, from the ground up. So our high school leadership intensive group, their project was to tackle food waste a couple of years ago. And that led them on this path of rescuing food from the waste stream and repurposing it for community meals. And it sparked this crazy idea, because it was so wildly popular, for them to then create a community cafe where that happens all the time, because they're actually having to turn away food from the waste stream because we don't have the capacity to be doing this all the time.
Okay.
So this can be, it's modeled after the One World Everybody Eats. And this would be a pay what you can cafe. And hopefully, the hope is that the majority of the food is being rescued, so there's low overhead, and hopefully we'll get a lot of volunteers and to minimize the staffing costs, but these meals will go out and people will pay whatever they think that it's valued at and what they can afford.
Wow. So we have teaching kitchens, we have community cafes, we have youth spaces. There are other demographics of our communities that are being supported and are being provided for. Elliot, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, so one of the biggest parts of the community center will be the adult daycare. So there's 2 models for adult daycare in Connecticut. There's a social model and a medical model, and we'll focus on the social model, and we'll be fully certified. So the social model of adult daycare are people who are beginning to experience Alzheimer's, dementia, and they can't be left alone at home and be safe and comfortable. And so this is a place to come, have some monitoring, have a lot of socialization, and because it's embedded in a larger center, we also get to give people access to the gardens outside, to the art classroom, to the music room, to the indoor park, where there's lots of people moving around and playing, and you can get sort of a passive socialization of being in the center of a community space without the pressure of needing to interact in any specific way. Yeah.
But there's other members of our community. The LGBTQ community is going to be represented. Can you tell us a little bit about, why it's so important to have an inclusive space for these very important members of our community?
Yeah, so the suicide and depression and anxiety rates within the queer and trans community are astonishingly high. And we have a really good number of queer and trans people here in our own community. And so having a space that from the beginning says, we know you're here, this is a space for you, goes a huge way to addressing that isolation, that despair, that anxiety, the suicidal ideation. The suicide rate of LGBT teens goes from like twice the non-LGBT teen rate to exactly the same as the population when they're received and acknowledged by their community. It doesn't take much to make a powerful difference in are our kids okay, or are they depressed and thinking about killing themselves?
And I think you and I have had conversations about how we break down stigma and how we break down one social perception. We see this with our teenagers all the time. People think teenagers are just disruptive. People think teenagers are just, difficult and antisocial, and it's not just teens. It's our LGBTQ community, it's our veteran community. We create stigma on top of everybody, and these sorts of spaces help to break down that, because then we actually see in a centre like the Kearns, everybody who lives in our community. It's a little bit almost like Sesame Street, isn't it? Everybody there is the people who live on the streets in which we live and inhabit. So we become much more accepting of each other and each other's differences, but most importantly, we see each other's similarities.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to run out of time because that's what we do. So there's a couple of things I want to make sure we hit on. How do people become involved?
We have a website, kearnscommunitycenter.org, and you can stay up to date on information on that. And also, there is a link to donate if monetary donations are something that you want to contribute to. If you want to sign up to volunteer, you can, Elliot and I's email, I believe, are up there.
Yep.
You can email us, and we're happy to plug you in the places that you feel you best fit. We're also on Facebook. Anything I'm missing?
No, Facebook's probably the best way to follow up with what we're doing.
Okay,
The
so-
website's up to date, but Facebook's where we share the
Great.
smaller
So we're going to
updates.
put that up at the end of the show. One of the things that's so impressive about this particular project is the bipartisan support that you have received across the community and in the political arena.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to achieve what, for some reason, we're not able to achieve anywhere else?
The purpose for the community center is what every civil servant elected representative is after. We're all after the same thing, a resilient community that can acknowledge one another, that can get through hard times with each other, that can grow, that can carefully use its resources. Everyone's looking for this sense of community care and well-being.
Isn't that the fundamentals?
Yes.
If only
Yeah.
we could always remember that, everything
Yep.
would be just a little bit easier. Okay, seeing we have like a minute and a half, instead of asking you another question, I'm going to ask you to tell me what else you'd like the viewing audience at home to know about Kearns in about a minute and a half.
Oh, go.
That's a real hard one.
Yeah, in a minute and a half. So what about the ability for us to be able to share affordable programming? I mean, here
Right.
comes an amazing opportunity to be able to reduce the costs.
Yep.
How would people be able to have programs running out of Kearns?
So we get to have different ways that people run programs. They either rent a space for $25 an hour to rent a classroom if they're a nonprofit, or more if they're a business. Or they run a class where, depending on the cost of materials, class fees vary. And our aim is that on average, $5 per class fee goes to the community center, to keeping the lights on and staff, keeping the building safe. But we get to stagger that so that in every class we offer, we get to make sure that there's some spots available to people who can't pay the whole amount. Because our community's strength disappears if suddenly poor people disappear from our spaces.
And that everybody who's there has access to exactly the same resources. I mean,
Yep.
it becomes that wonderful equalising factor in our community. So thank you so much for coming and sharing the plans for Kearns. I hope you'll come back when it's up and running.
Yes.
Maybe we can be there for the ribbon cutting.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely.
Of course, on the Kearns website, you'll be able to see a plan and you'll be able to dig down a little more into what we've talked about today. So health promotion and disease prevention is about so much more than just the provision of medical treatment. In public health, we look to our communities that we live in and how well they provide access to safe and affordable housing, food and education. We also look at how well a community provides thriving collaborations that prioritise prevention and equitable representations of the populations that they serve. The development of a shared community space like the proposed Kearns Community Centre in Granby are becoming the way of the future for enriching community life and providing access to multi-generational supports that include all members that live and work in a community. As we build towards the future, we need to look at the best use of underused social infrastructure and be brave enough to envision the communities we wish to live in. We need to build by design. We need to build communities that are driven, have equitable spaces, and look to the prevention of physical and mental health conditions whilst fostering connection, collaboration, and influencing policy changes that shape the future for the next generation. For more information about today's show, please feel free to access the Kearns Community Centre website, www.kearnscommunitycentre.org, or of course their Facebook site, or you can find out more information from the Farmington Valley website, www.fvhd.org, and of course our Facebook page. And remember, until next time, your greatest wealth is your health.